This is Nathaniel Cogley.
And this is Eric Morrow. Welcome to Cogley and Morrow on Politics, this week edition that follows one last week where we had Mayor Doug Savine on from the mayor of Stephenville, and we have had a lot of feedback and response from that from people who heard that show.
It was a great interview.
It was a great interview, and it's also we had a big announcement on the part of the city of Stephenville this week that we had a little bit of a scoop on. We didn't have an exact name or anything.
Now we know it's Hobby Lobby.
Right, yeah. It's Hobby Lobby. So, but in terms of the interview, it was a great opportunity to have a local elected official on the show to talk about some of the challenges and issues related to city government. And today, before we end the show, we're going to get back to that with talking about some of the issues that are on the agenda at the federal level, both in terms of the federal government, but then also the U.S. Conference of Mayors is meeting this week in Washington, D.C., and they have addressed a number of issues of concern. And I think it's always good to keep those kinds of issues, whether you're in a city big or small, just in understanding what's going on and some of the challenges that our local officials face. But before we get to that, we have this impeachment trial that has been ongoing.
Is that going on?
It's been going on, and I'm sure some of our listeners have wondered if we were going to get back to that at some point. Maybe not. Maybe they're saturated with what's been on news on a regular basis, or just watching at least 12 hours of C-SPAN coverage during the day.
Well, we air on Sunday, and of course the impeachment, the Senate takes Sunday off, so you got your fill of actual watching the testimony, and now you get the analysis on your day off.
Yes. Well, we're going to pack in a lot of analysis. We just want to remind you that we'll put related links to articles on our Facebook page, Cogley and Morrow on Politics, and then also this episodes are always available after they air at noon on Sunday on KTRL FM 90.5, that you can download them as a podcast. You can access them on SoundCloud, and we are actually gathering quite a number of past episodes. And so if you're really into this and you haven't caught up, I think we're on our 18th show, so you have plenty of opportunity to go back, plenty of options to look at timely discussion of a number of events. So we welcome you with us today. We're going to get started off here looking at what's going on. My co-host Nathaniel Cogley here has been doing the rounds on radio around the country this week on this issue, and I've dipped in. I mean, it's very hard. I mean, we have jobs and we have families and we have errands to run and chores to do. So just like everybody else, trying to get in on what's going on with impeachment and watch hours and hours of presentation is very, very challenging. But I dipped in some this week to try to get a sense of this. One is it's very historic. I mean, we're seeing something happen that we don't see happen very often, and hasn't happened in the history of our country. It's also, and a lot of people have been looking back and reflecting on that, is how does this connect to the Clinton impeachment, and then further back to Johnson. I mean, how does this relate to that? But then on the other hand, and I think this is where I'll go with some of this in a moment. I think a lot of this is looking ahead. We're in an election cycle, a general election cycle. There are tremendous political implications for a very political process, as we've said all along. We see a lot of blurring of the lines between this is a trial and how does a trial function and how is it structured, evidence and crimes, and all of this discussion that I think try to connect with what people's perceptions are about a process like this. But then sometimes what gets left out is really looking at, okay, what are the politics of it? In the interviews and the topics that you've discussed this week, Nathaniel, what are some of the points of interest? Where have people been going and zeroing in on what has happened this past week in Washington?
I think some of the historical points of interest that you were highlighting there is we've never had an impeachment with a divided Congress before. So both in the Johnson case and in the Clinton case, the same party controlled both chambers. And we saw that very interesting politics about delaying sending the articles over. And because this is the first time we've had the two parties with controlling two different chambers. That politics is very interesting. We've also never had an impeachment where the president and the Senate were the same party. And so we've also kind of been thinking, how's the Senate going to handle this? According to the senators of the president's party, the vast majority think of this is a very weak charges. This is inappropriate to even be here. But yet the expectation is that they're going to hold a trial. So one of the more interesting things here is the Republicans have control of the chamber. They have 53 Republican senators. There had been talk for a while to just dismiss this outright, to not even go through this process. And yet here we are going through the process. Now, why might that be? 53 Republican senators, there's enough Republicans from moderate swing states here where it's just not good politics for them to dismiss this right out the gate. Even if they maybe genuinely believe that there's not much here, but for Susan Collins in Maine, for Cory Gardner in Colorado, for Martha McSally in Arizona, it's good politics for them to be patient and say, I didn't dismiss right out. I let the House managers make their case. The president's counsel makes their case, potentially a witness or two. And after taking in the totality of the facts and being objective, then I voted not guilty. And so while I don't think there's anywhere, I don't even think there's a Republican here that's going to vote guilty, there are some moderate Republicans and some others who have adversarial relationships with Trump, like Senator Romney or Senator Murkowski, where it's good for them and their brand and the politics of their swing state to be patient and go through this process.
So in terms of the strategy for the Democrats and how they've been presenting it, I mean, that's one thing to have you comment on as well. But how does that strategy then connect with this awareness that this benefits politically those Republican senators who would say, okay, we want this process to go forward, but we want to be able to have that flexibility to say, hey, look, we listened, we let both sides present. Do you think that that's factoring into their strategy, or they're just looking at the numbers and saying, well, that's for their political fortunes, or however we want to see this result in a removal from office?
Well, yeah, you can imagine these the members pursuing this. They'd like to go all out. They want the full trial, all these witnesses, and then a guilty verdict and conviction and removal and barring from office. So these moderate Republicans from swing states, they've given them that much. We'll go through this process. But then the key question comes up on, are there going to be additional witnesses? Who are they going to be? And that's been in some of the early presentation, this kind of call from some of the House managers to have people like John Bolton or Mick Mulvaney testify. One thing that's very interesting in these two teams is the House managers are active politicians. They are representatives from districts, whereas Trump has a professional team designed to win the case. And I'm not belittling the House managers' skill set or experiences. 6 out of the 7 have law degrees. They're more accomplished politicians than me. They've won districts. But their primary audience is their home district, and that comes out in some of their approach here. So we have a clip here from Jerry Nadler. He's chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, and he said this on his first day of presentation. Taylor?
No, the president does not want you to hear from Ambassador Bolton, because the president does not want the American people to hear firsthand testimony about the misconduct at the heart of this trial. The question is whether the Senate will be complicit in the president's crimes by covering them up. Any senator who votes against Ambassador Bolton's testimony, or any relevant testimony, shows that he or she wants to be part of the cover-up. What other possible reason is there to prohibit a relevant witness from testifying here? Unfortunately, so far I've seen every Republican senator has shown that they want to be part of the cover-up by voting against every document and witness proposed.
I mean, wow, Eric, who's the audience, right? I mean, if this was actually designed to convict and remove President Trump from office, they need to build a bipartisan coalition. And we saw in the House process, they weren't doing that. And lo and behold, they come to the Senate, and Jerry Nadler basically is looking at the Republican senators who, in theory, you would need their votes if you're going to convict and remove, and saying you all are complicit in the cover-up. This is not the type of messaging designed to win the case, but it is the type of messaging to send to your Democratic home district.
Right. It's very, very partisan messaging that goes back to just here a few weeks ago after the Iranian attack on the the base in Iraq, where you had people accusing others of sympathizing with the terrorist. It's that very strong and deliberate political rhetoric that's meant to direct public opinion in a certain way, and I think that was there from the beginning. Looking back today at the opening remarks made by Adam Schiff, and it was very much directed at that point of saying, here's this moment in history. You have to act. You have to fulfill your oath to the Constitution. It was put in such terms of the founders are watching. It was like you have to realize the gravity of this moment. And in the middle of all of that, when he came back to speak the second time is when he said, well, if this isn't impeachable, what is? And I listened intently along the way to all of that. And then we got to that point, I'm going, okay, you may not be, wait a minute, let's hold on here a minute. Because I could think of a lot of things that would be much worse in terms of high crimes and misdemeanors, if you want to put it in that language, that a president could do.
Absolutely.
And then this is what makes me gravitate to the political focus of this. It's very much on the election cycle, is that when you go back and you look at all of this, yes, there may be agreement in some areas. The president made a mistake. He shouldn't have done this. He shouldn't have had that phone call in the way it was. Even some Republicans that are saying, okay, well, he messed up. I wouldn't do that if I was president. That wouldn't be something that I would do, and then try to, instead of owning it, which he could have, some have recommended that if he had just owned it and said, well, look, I was trying to protect American resources. I didn't know about this, the authority of Congress in terms of appropriations. I was just trying to be sure that American resources and national interests were protected. But he didn't do that. And so we're at this point here where it does become very, very partisan, and that has just continued on into these proceedings. I think that's part of it in our listeners, that of parsing this. It's not about picking a side and then being so negative toward the other side to say, well, I don't even want to listen to them. It's really understanding what's going on in this process and what are the political elements of it and how that's being played out through that process.
Yeah, and I think narratives, we're used to politicians giving us a narrative when they're just speaking or they're giving a political speech, but to see the narratives, not factual-based case, but a narrative spill over into the actual argumentation on the floor of the Senate. Even Nadler referred to the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 as the Anti-Impoundment Act of 1974. It's just not called that. It's called impoundment control, not anti-impoundment. And he's saying there can't possibly be anything more impeachable than this. And I'm sure you have a dozen hypotheticals in your head that you go much more serious than this situation.
Hollywood's come out with a number of movies that would give us a lot more serious things to consider for impeachment than.
And I see a lot of this messaging to the home district, why that's not convincing. This kind of, spun narrative is not convincing to winning over Republican senators that actually have votes. It plays to the home district, to the partisan home district. And I see a lot of the House managers, what I see is they're scripting their narrative for when they lose this trial. So Nadler is saying right now, if you don't call John Bolton as a witness, all of you Republican senators are complicit in the cover-up. You're going to hear that throughout the election year, long after this trial has been lost by the House managers. And then when Adam Schiff was presenting yesterday, I heard this quote that's not much talked about in the media, but it caught my attention.
Tomorrow, we will conclude the presentation of the facts and law on Article 1, and we will begin and complete the same on Article 2, the President's unconstitutional obstruction of Congress. The President's counsel will then have 3 days to make their presentations, and then you will have 16 hours to ask questions, and then the trial will begin. And then you will actually get to hear from the witnesses yourself, and then you'll get to see the documents yourself, or so we hope, and so do the American people. And after their testimony and after we've had closing arguments, then it will be in your hands.
Okay, Eric, so Adam Schiff says after the House presents its case, after the President's counsel presents their case, after we get 2 days of the senators asking questions, which has got to be in written form, then the trial will begin and you'll get the witnesses. When I hear this, I basically hear him saying, if there's no witnesses, there's no trial. His logic defies what's been going on for the last few days. The trial began a few days ago, yes. And he's saying the trial doesn't begin until the witnesses start being called. What do you think when you hear this?
Well, I think it's moving this into the court of public opinion.
Yes.
That's where the trial is, and it's after. and like you said, they're setting it up for the messaging that will follow this, and so the trial is not so much. I mean, he's trying to paint everyone into a corner to say, okay, well, they didn't allow a trial to proceed.
Yeah, that wasn't a real trial.
Clear. Right, that wasn't. We were just presenting the rationale of why we needed one, and now we need to move to what the public would consider a trial, because while we understand in terms of this impeachment process that this is the actual trial, you've got the Chief Justice there, you have the arguments being presented, you've got very strict rules of order. To the public, it looks like an average day on the Senate floor. I mean, in that you've got people speaking. If you're there, and an average day is actually a lot of people milling around at times. Sometimes there's order, but people are moving in and out. This is very, very, very confining, and everyone has to be very focused. But it is trying to put it in terms that the general public will understand that, a trial with witnesses, and then you render a verdict. Is he guilty or not? Again, this is not about guilt or not guilt. It's not about really, is there a crime or not a crime. It's about being fit for office or removing someone from office. Again, where I see this, and going back to that statement he made about if this is not impeachable, what is, that this is an accumulation, and we've talked about this in previous shows, of all of the issues that Democrats have had with Trump. I mean, it's being poured into this moment where they're taking all of the policy disagreements, they're taking his demeanor, they're taking the way he's conducted himself in the office, which we've talked about some of this. We agree and disagree on many things about that. And again, I'm not trying to lay a defense for anybody. I'm just trying to explain the politics.
That's what makes the show fun. Happening. When we disagree.
Well, yeah, and in the sense, and there's a lot of that I could say I agree with in terms of, I think, what are the qualifications for someone to be in the office and to be an effective executive in terms of policy and focusing in on critical issues and then working the system of governance we have to get the outcomes that you want. Mm-hmm. And so all of that is being focused into this moment, knowing that it's almost like putting it through a strainer or even a funnel to then come out the other side with everything full force focused on the outcomes of that 2020 election.
Yeah, and I think we got here, the media, much of the media has been out to get Trump and hurt Trump in the upcoming election. But they pushed the Democratic Party so far into pro-impeachment, where 86% of Democrats want impeachment, that members from very Democratic districts have to go forward. And Nancy Pelosi's one of those, and she's the Speaker of the House. And she said, we got to go forward. She's from San Francisco, my hometown. It's a very Democratic district. And we look at this committee, besides Pelosi being from a very Democratic district, Adam Schiff represents Burbank in L.A. I think Jay Leno's show was down there, right? Yeah. That's a 50-point, that's a district Hillary Clinton won by 50 points. To really be aggressively after Trump is good politics in his district. Jerry Nadler from Manhattan, and Trump's also from Manhattan, but Hillary won it by 59 points. Huge, massive district. Zoe Lofgren, she's from San Jose, California, where I was born and lived till I was 3 years old, actually. 52-point Clinton district. Hakeem Jeffries from Brooklyn, New York, a 71-point Hillary Clinton district. Val Demings from Orlando, Florida, 27-point Hillary Clinton district. Sylvia Garcia from the Houston area, 50-point Clinton. They are from districts where this is good for them. It's going to lose. They're going to lose the case. They don't have a strong case to impeach, convict, remove this president. But it's good politics in their district to go forward and to fight this fight.
Right. Yeah, and I agree that the case is not strong. I think the critical thing is they don't have the votes, right. Because I go back to this being
because the case isn't strong.
Right. Well, and I even see, like you said before, Romney and and Cory Gardner, Susan Collins, who's also, she's numbers are showing that she's in trouble already. It's going to be a very competitive race. But they are very much focused on how this plays out, and you have to think that every member of Congress almost. I mean, it's if they're not looking at it in terms of their own district, they're looking at it in terms of the national implications and how the leadership will stack up post November 2020. When a new Congress comes in session next year, a new or reelected president in the White House, how is this all going to how is all this going to set up coming out of this process and then moving into a very intense primary season, which is about to start about a week from now, that has tremendous implications for where we go in the next 4 to 6 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we look at this trial unfold, that real key moment is going to come after the senators ask their questions, which probably will be entertaining. Right. Well, what questions are they going to ask? Right. But then they'll be able to have a vote on dismissal or not, and then we'll get that question of witnesses. And I have a theory, Eric, that not all the radio hosts who interviewed me bid on, and I could be wrong, but right now in the media, we tend to have two possibilities how this plays out. One is that there'll be no witnesses, that we'll just get to that point, and the Republicans will have 51 votes to say they've seen enough, nothing impeachable here, nothing to convict and remove a president on. And the other scenario that seems to be in the media is these big dramatic witnesses coming in. And reciprocity. So you get the Bolton and you get Hunter Biden, and it's going to be this big, dramatic, game-changing witnesses. I don't think either of those scenarios is going to play out. The key here, and why we're even going through this stage of the process at all, is these Republicans from swing states where it's good to be patient, objective, hear out the case before voting not guilty, which I think is in their heart to do. And for these people, it's going to be good to call a witness or two. They're just not going to call the witnesses the Democrats want. They're not going to caucus with the 47 Democrats. They're going to have to come up with a witness that's acceptable to all Republicans. And there's two real lines of questioning here that's been going on. Did the president do what is alleged? And that leads you into people like, John Bolton. Did they go over there, do a quid pro quo and link the money to the investigations? That's one line of questioning. The other line of questioning is what is alleged even an actual crime? There's disagreement about that. And one thing that the House never considered, because it came out on the day the trial began, was this Government Accountability Office report that somehow spun deferring the funds within the fiscal year as a big constitutional, not faithfully executing the laws violation. They made a big thing out of it. And the Office of Management and Budget doesn't agree with that assessment. They believe that they acted within the law, within the Impoundment Control Act law. And so I could see this play out, and I could totally be wrong, but I enjoy predicting. And sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. I see a couple witnesses, but I see them to be technocrats who address maybe whatever they believe the Democrats' best points were, and then they get someone to address it. So to bring in an OMB witness to counter that GOA report that the House never actually dealt with because it wasn't out yet. And so you get a couple witnesses so that Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski and Cory Gardner can say, we did call witnesses. They take away that talking point. You guys didn't even call witnesses. Well, we did call witnesses, and they made it clear that they felt they followed the law. And then based on the totality of the case and the witnesses that we called, there was no crime that rises to treason, bribery, other high crimes, misdemeanors, and we dismiss. Is this plausible, or am I lost here?
No, I think it's very plausible. I mean, it's a looking at the scale of this. So just to give an analogy here, as an administrator in a state institution, you have all kinds of policies. You're aware of some of them you're not, because they're not applied on a regular basis. And so
when I'm not aware, I come to you, right?
Right, that's right, yes. And then I ask further up if I'm not aware either. But sometimes you do things that are, in general, you're keeping with good intent, and you're trying to follow a process, but either something's changed you're not aware of, and so you're made aware of that. They said, okay, this was a mistake, or this wasn't, correct this, we can fix it this time, or we can't, and then move on, and you're aware. And it's kind of like just a warning, to say, hey, this is the way that you should do this.
A learning moment, yeah.
Right. Of course, we're not talking about $400 billion or in terms of foreign aid or whatever, but
400 million.
Okay,
yeah.
Yes, right. Well, even 400 million, so a little less. But so we're not talking about that in terms of magnitude. But when you look on the scale of our federal government, you look at the latitude that a president has in terms of foreign policy under the Constitution. You look at the amounts that we're talking about. 400 million is a small amount in comparison, and I don't. In this case, I don't think the amount really matters. Is this really an issue or a problem or an offense that says, okay, you shouldn't do it this way. You made a mistake. Whatever the conversations were, whatever the motivation was or intent, that's very difficult to prove. I think we've seen the challenges with that.
That's what Article 1 is. It's a motive crime.
Right.
There's no crime, but they're saying he has corrupt motives. It's very tough to prove, just like you're saying.
Yes, it's very difficult, and because you have people all over the place. And even this, the idea that they would bring in Bolton, who probably would not even get to testify if executive privilege was asserted.
He'd be able to answer some questions, but not others.
Right.
Yeah.
But that benefits him because he says, well, look, I was willing. I mean, that sells books and gets you interviews, in that, okay, I was willing to go and, answer what questions I could. It adds to the drama of it. I don't, in terms of substance, I don't know that it would.
I don't even think Bolton has really made as much waves as he intended. He was basically, if I'm subpoenaed, I'll testify. Well, me too, if I'm subpoenaed.
Right,
I mean, It wasn't like he said he had groundbreaking information.
Right.
The thing about him is he's former. I mean, he has left the cabinet,
right.
So people think maybe he'll be willing to, say what's on his mind. But there's no lead here that he has some really damaging thing to say anyway, let alone if you get through executive privilege.
Right, and I think the strategy then coming out of that, especially when we're looking at the Democratic candidates and even those running for re-election in Congress, is not the one on the basis of this was an impeachable offense and he should have been removed from office. It goes back to the question of competency. That can be a point of focus. Is this person really capable? Is this one of many, many issues that could be strung together in terms of a narrative that says on the other part is, well, I'm running against Donald J. Trump for president, and these are the reasons why, and here are example after example of someone who does not know how to do the job.
You bring up the Democrats running for president, and of course we still have 3 Democratic senators in it. They have to be tied down in this trial.
Right.
Next week we'll be looking forward to the Iowa caucuses. They'd love to be in Iowa and New Hampshire campaigning. So that's Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and Senator Amy Klobuchar. They're tied up in this trial. There's some theories out there that maybe this is what Pelosi wanted, to tie up these senators because she prefers Biden, who's not tied up by this. I'm not so sure. I think she's more focused on winning her district than damaging some Democratic presidential candidates. But what do you think about the fact of keeping these 3 senators in for the trial when they want to be out campaigning?
I think it is a disadvantage. I think the one that it hurts the most is Klobuchar because she
was
had moving up,
momentum,
and now the chance of her placing high enough to go past
Iowa right now.
She does. Yeah. She definitely does. So, but we'll be tracking this again, and certainly have more to address as we look ahead, both in terms of the primary and in terms of the impeachment process. Before we move off of this issue and take a quick break, Nathaniel has one more thing to add.
One more thing to say. I'm just saying this is tough for the senators. They have to sit there all day and night into some long hours. They have to be silent. If you know senators, they like talking. They don't like to sit there silent and be, They can't have their smartphone with them. These are busy people communicating all the time. They have to sit there silent with no phone to the late hours of the night. And they have to listen to some partisan Democratic House members lecture them with talking points, and they shut up. This is tough for them, and it's not like a criminal trial or a judicial court trial where the jury is a captive. You're assigned jury duty, and it can take up a chunk of your life, and you're not really in control of the timetable. This is a situation where the jury itself can say, I'm tired of this. I don't want to do this anymore. Let's end it. And I think that's an interesting dynamic to watch as the shock of these senators, some of them in their 70s, have to sit there through this. No cell phone. Be quiet. Listen to talking points all day. This is going to take a toll on them.
Yes, it is. Yes, it will take a toll, and we see it. Just the challenges of sometimes having students sit through class for 50 minutes or an hour and 15, much less senators sitting for 4 hours at a time. But anyway, we will get back to this and be following it so that we can bring you quality analysis on this. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with more Cogley and Morrow on politics.
Politics can be confusing, but Cogley and Morrow have your back. Follow them on Facebook. Search Cogley and Morrow on Politics to stay up to date with the show and for all of the sources to follow right along. Cogley and Morrow is a production of the Tarleton Radio Network.
Welcome back to Cogley and Morrow on Politics. As mentioned, next week we'll be focusing on the Iowa caucuses. We have one more show before that event takes place. But this week, Eric, you sent me a Washington Post article, and we're going to put that up on our Facebook page so our listeners can check it out themselves. And it's entitled "The Harmful Popular Misconceptions About Rural America." I got to read this, and the author, Christopher Ingram, makes 5 points, misconceptions about rural America. And they were interesting, and they lead to some good discussions. So number one was that rural is synonymous with Midwestern. And the author brings up the point that there's rural areas in all regions of the country, not just Midwestern assumptions. Eric, any thoughts on that one?
Well, and I think this is one that's critical to understand, especially when we're looking at current politics in the country, is that a lot of a focus is being given to the weight of urban centers and their vote. It's being given attention in state houses in terms of representation of rural versus urban interest at the local level. So this focus on understanding our country as a whole and looking at it and knowing that in its diversity is this diversity that is sometimes misconceived between urban areas and what people who live in those areas think about rural areas. And I thought this article was very appropriate. We live here in Erath County, which is considered rural Texas.
And as I say, Erath County is the best county on earth.
Okay, yes. We'll see what response we get to that joke. But anyway, that's Cogley at tarleton.edu, right? Okay, so, but anyway, we live in rural Texas, and I thought some of these misconceptions applied, or at least it's a way of letting our listeners know in rural Texas how this connects and how either our area is different or similar to other areas.
And we're in cattle country.
Yes, very much in cattle country and ranching. We can go further south. You have more agriculture. Further west, you have cattle and hunting is a big industry there as well. But this first one about rural is synonymous with Midwestern, and I can talk from experience from this. I lived in Boston, Massachusetts. I lived in New York City. And when I was there, I had the opportunity in both states. I was there long enough to be able to go to some of the rural areas of those states. And while it did remind you somewhat, especially because of either the geography or the lack of an accent, it seemed like, especially if you've been in New York or if you live further south, that there was seemed like, well, this is very much Midwestern, you might say. On the other hand, it's very, very different. For example, New Jersey. Most people think of New Jersey as this industrial state with very dense industry and population. You go into western New Jersey and you find ranches and cowboys and country western music. And I mean, it's a very, very different place and culture. And some of that's changing because of population growth. But I think this first one, it's very clear that we have rural areas, and those rural areas in and of themselves are diverse from one state to another throughout the country. I think the critical thing of what we're seeing, and we definitely see this in Texas, is that we have been on this continuum of moving from a rural state to now that about 90% of our population in the state lives in urban areas, which creates a challenge for a state as big as Texas, a challenge when you have agriculture as one of your major industries in the state, and these urban areas continue to grow. I mean, we're one of the fastest growing areas in some of our cities in the nation, and so that diversity is something that can create political challenges that we're seeing, but it's also something I think people need to be aware of when they associate with the broader place in which they live, not just the country itself, but certainly right here in our own state.
Yeah, someone who spent part of their childhood in Nevada City, California, population 2,000, and also worked at a salmon cannery in Ecook, Alaska. You know, I already kind of get that there's rural all over the place. It's not just cattle country. But I took another lesson from that, just extending it out. Sometimes when we analyze the map, we think of urban states and rural states. There really are no urban states. You know, even in New York and California and Florida, where we have major big cities, there's a ton of rural areas there too.
Right. You can say Texas is an urban state. I mean, you look at the percentage of the population, but that would then ignore, and part of the reason why it's not ignored is Texas is such a big state geographically in terms of size. And so people think of, New York City, that must be the entire state of New York. Well, it's not. I mean, New York, the majority of New York State is a rural state.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, the number 2 misconception about rural areas in this article is, quote unquote, rural is synonymous with white. Now, I don't use the word white. I tend to use European American. I don't like the base colors. I like the continent of ancestry -- continent of citizenship. But rural is synonymous with white, and that's a misconception. Eric, any thoughts on that?
Yes, that does, again, say that, especially even in Texas, when you move more toward our southern counties and many of them rural counties that have a majority Hispanic population, but even right here in Erath County, I looked at the census numbers from 2010 compared to the projections. Currently, about 1/5 of the population in Erath County is Hispanic, and that's up 2%. Projected from the last census, so we don't know where that'll land with the census for this year. So that shows that there's a level of diversity there, and that varies, and it really comes down. This is where we go back to our discussion last week. All politics is local with the mayor. That it comes down to each individual county. That's how different those rural areas can be in terms of the makeup of the population within the county.
Well, I think highlighting this idea of rural minorities is very interesting. And it says 22% of rural population is classified as a quote-unquote minority. In other words, not European American. But that's interesting because the Republican Party does so well with rural population, but yet the Democratic Party tends to do well with quote-unquote minority demographics. And so there is a group of people, rural minorities. I mean, both parties kind of have a leverage in onto being attractive to that group, and it seems like a group that they really want to compete over.
Right. It is, and I think it will become more that way, especially in states that could have the potential of moving to be swing states. So we're in one, which I think that's very interesting in the years ahead to watch how that dynamic changes in rural America. Made the case before, I think we've talked about it on this show, one of the reasons that the urban areas like Dallas, San Antonio, Houston have not had the impact, though they vote mostly, there's a higher percentage of people who vote Democrat. Why that has not had the impact, say, like it does in Ohio, when you have Cincinnati and Cleveland, Toledo, that may go Democrat, but the rest of the state's all red. We have all these mid-level cities. So we have Lubbock and Amarillo and El Paso. We have these cities that and some of them, Waco's another example, where they're within 100 to 200,000 in population. Well, you add all those up, and the fact that they vote majority Republican and not Democrat impacts the outcomes of statewide elections. And so in Texas, it's a little more complex in looking at demographics in that way.
Well, you just think in terms of specifically Texas, as the Hispanic population grows, we are a border state. But not all of them are going to settle in urban areas. Some of them will be in smaller areas, and it's something where it's not entirely clear that the trend to the Democratic Party will continue. Certainly the Republican Party would want to compete. They'd certainly do well with rural populations. Regardless of background, they'd want to compete for that. So the third misconception here in this article is rural is synonymous with quote-unquote conservative. Eric, any thoughts on that one?
Well, again, I would just go back to in other parts of the country, especially places where I live, that is certainly not always the case. I mean, Massachusetts to me is a good example. I always heard growing up the comparisons with not Texas and New York, but Texas and Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. Partly because Massachusetts politics had its level of influence nationally. Texas has been there in that mix as well. And so there was always these comparisons. And when I lived there, it was very interesting because you also look at a state where the governorship has moved back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. I mean, Mitt Romney was governor there, more moderate Republican. And you look at the politics that go on, which in the urban center and other places that are heavily populated might be more progressive and associate with Democrats. And you go in the rural areas and you might see more Republican representation. When you get to the state level, the types of policies that come out are very different. You wouldn't think that a state that has that much representation from the Republican Party would often be cited for the kind of progressive policies that are put in place at the state level. And so I think that shows that, again, you have to go down to that regional state, if not regional level, to really understand the politics, understand the makeup and mixture of people and how they see specific issues. It's not just this label of conservative or liberal or Republican or Democrat as much as looking at how those issues impact people and then what is the political culture in which they've grown up in and has influenced them to see the role of government the way they do.
Yeah, and what we find in some of these states where statewide one party dominates is the opposing party, whether it's the Democrat or Republican, the minority party in the state, has to change, has to adjust to the state politics. You know, we think of Kentucky as a very Republican state, and then I got called to do some interviews on a Democrat winning the governor's race in Kentucky, and it was a big deal, and I had to study up on Kentucky politics. It's not really my thing. But I came across, and it's not in front of me, but I think this is correct, it's like 8 out of the last 12 governor's races, a Democrat won. So it's not like actually this is groundbreaking. Democrats win the governor's race all the time in Kentucky because the Democratic Party of Kentucky is not the National Democratic Party on all its issues. And even in Texas here, the Democratic Party of Texas probably has to adjust from the National Democratic Party on some issues to compete in Texas effectively.
Right. You see that especially on economic issues that historically, if you look at Democrats in Texas, they've been economic conservatives. It's when you started to have that divide with social conservatism that really began to change. And then, of course, national changes in party identification had a tremendous impact on Texas and the South, starting in the 70s and then into the Reagan era. But you still, and you would, I think we'll see this, that going forward, if the state turns more purple, if there's possibility of being a swing state, you're going to find that the rank and file Democrat still leans toward being an economic conservative. I mean, that's the political culture that's here in the state that has had such a long influence and will continue to have it, even though there will be some more progressive, or we'd say very liberal in terms of their focus on economic issues within the party, but they're not going to be dominant.
Well, I'm familiar with that in California. Democrats have had control of the state for a while, but we had a number of Republican governors, Pete Wilson, Arnold Schwarzenegger, but they were all pro-abortion rights Republicans, not what wins at the national level in presidential primaries and elections. Number 4 misconception about rural Americans here, Eric, is that they, quote unquote, this is not Cogley saying this is out of this article. Number 4, quote unquote, rural Americans don't care about the news. Eric, what do you think about that misconception?
Well, I think there's 2 parts to this. I think one is that's not true.
Right.
I think it's very that people in rural America may be connected more with national news through like network news than they are with state politics or even local. The challenge really in rural America today is access to news on state and local level that on the issues that impact people the most. I mean, we talked about this a little bit with the mayor last week, was how people stay informed about what's going on in their community. If you don't subscribe to the newspaper, if you don't look it up on social media. So I think this is certainly this is a stereotype that's kind of pushed out, that people are it may kind of go along with, they're rural in the past, thinking, they're farmers and ranchers, the maybe less education, not as much engaged in what's going on in the world. I just don't see that as the case, and I see certainly our role here at an institution like we're at in Stephenville, and with the students that we work with, it may be working and helping people be more engaged and know the kinds of sources they need to go to. I just see the challenge becoming more and more that of access. Yeah,
but it seems like access has been changing with technology. I mean, we live in a small town here in Stephenville, a great small town. But hey, we got internet, I got a cable subscription. I mean, I'm flooded with information. It's not a question of access, but how can I process everything on my to-do list? But it seems like technology has kind of made this news much more accessible in rural areas.
Yes, I agree, and I think that's where the emphasis needs to be on encouraging people to engage in that way, and not kind of fall into the ruts of, I only listen to this, or only relying on social media, but to know that there are plenty of resources out there in which to stay connected.
Yeah. Number 5 on the misperceptions about rural communities. Number 5, quote unquote, rural America is the real America. Eric, thoughts here?
Yes, well, I think this one flies right in the face of recognizing the diversity of our country as a whole. I mean, it's defining what is real America. I was talking to a student today about some of my experiences in New York City, and one of the remarks always is, "What's it like you're in a whole nother country?" And well, maybe in terms of it being different, but it's not. You're in America, and that's just as much a part of of our nation and the what makes up the nation. And it's really that level of diversity. And I think the issue here is, and it comes both ways. It's on the part of people in rural America to recognize that there are people who have chosen to live in urban America, and that urban Americans to see that there's value to those people who live in rural America, and there's a value to the quality of life or the way of life that people choose to have in rural parts of the country. So I think it's one of those challenges of again, recognizing the level of diversity in the world that we live in, especially in our country, but then with an understanding of that, then engaging with the policy issues and the challenges of governance that come with that.
Well, I grew up both in San Francisco and Nevada City. San Francisco very big, Nevada City very small. I think there might be some dynamic here that feeds into this. Certainly our great American urban centers are part of America, no doubt about it. But growing up in San Francisco and being a cab driver there, we got quote-unquote Chinatown, Japantown, the Mission District, where you can go there and all of a sudden the languages on the storefronts are Chinese, Japanese, Spanish. And so our big urban centers on the coast do attract immigrants from other parts of the world. That first wave of immigrants usually keeps some of the customs. Some of them come over as still citizens of the other country. They keep a lot of the customs and languages. And it takes a generation or two before people fully matriculate into American culture and citizenship.
Right. Yes. That's my experience when I was in New York. I mean, it's just an amazing diversity, and to be able to experience that. But again, I think for me, that's still part of the history of this country. I mean, I enjoyed that, about that, living in that part of the country. I chose to come back to Texas to be close to family. I like the rural way of life where you can run 10 errands in an hour instead of one, living on Long Island. I mean, that was one of the challenges, but it was still a unique opportunity to be in that environment and to see that level of diversity in our country. And I think that's an awareness that all of us really need, no matter where we choose to live.
Well, I love going in New York. I can speak Wolof on the street corner with Senegalese. I lived in Senegal for a while, so I'm familiar with that. So we had one more thing before we go. You also highlighting something I wasn't familiar with. So there's the United States Conference of Mayors. is the official nonpartisan organization of cities with populations of 30,000 or more. I thought this was very interesting because I think of kind of the city level to the county level to the state level, and then we're in a union of the USA. But here you have this conference where mayors from different states, different counties come together, discuss and coordinate on different issues. I thought this was very interesting to read.
And this is interesting to help people understand that it's government lobbying government. I mean, this is an advocacy group. It is a conference, and it does focus on resources and studies of issues, but it's also to direct that into the conversations at the federal level to look at how federal government is collaborating with local government. And so I think it's critical, following our interview with the mayor last week and some of the other issues, was just to give this some attention, to recognize that with all the diversity that we have in terms of some major issues that are going on in the country right now, there is some unanimity and what is being asked of the federal government and even in the state houses as well, to try to help local officials navigate. And a couple of those issues that had come up for me in looking at some of the materials and some of the agenda and the focus, a lot of attention is being given to guns, firearm safety, mental health related issues, especially in the wake of the increase in mass shootings. I mean, that's one that plays heavily on local law enforcement. One that's always in the mix near the top is infrastructure, talking about transportation, both in terms of mass transit and roads, rail and air. And then the other one that has been very taxing, and this is where cities and counties often collaborate because it sometimes falls into rural areas, is the opioid epidemic around the country, where cities have just not had the capacity to be able to try to be proactive in addressing this.
So we're in the political science discipline, and sometimes there's a political science conference. We come together from around and talk political science. Here, mayors come together outside of their state structure and meet and talk the job of mayor. And do you think this type of conference actually yields positive policy benefits?
I think it does. I think it shows a level of unanimity, as I had said, where many of them in communities this size or larger are dealing with some of the same issues, some of the same challenges, and they've got to come together like this in order to have that impact on federal government, and the resources are there that they can access.
Well, great. This was another fun show. Next week, we'll definitely be talking Iowa caucuses. We'll probably have some impeachment updates. Thank you very much for joining us this week on Cogley and Morrow on Politics. We'll see you next week right here on 90.5 KTRL.
This has been a Tarleton Radio Network podcast with production from AJ Heyer and Taylor Welch. Find more great shows by searching Tarleton Radio Network wherever you get your podcasts.